Well, we're here for our last session. Thank you guys for hanging in there. I know it's been a long day, and fortunately, it's almost as cold outside as it is in here. I want to introduce Richard Heflin to you. Richard was probably, he doesn't know this, but he was the very first person from Region 10 when I started this job. It was one of my proctors. It was at one of these buildings sitting here where I was sitting like you guys, and it was a statewide conference on the new transition model and like that. And it was Richard and Lane that were the prompters and all that like 6 years ago. And so I've been fortunate to serve on a CRCG committee with him for many years, and Richard is a great resource for Region 10, for all of us here, for mental health. We've been going through a lot of the mental health stuff the last couple of years, and it's becoming higher and higher in the front. So I'm so excited that he was going to end our talk today. And everybody out there, and whatever this is, Zoom, thank you for hanging in there as well. And thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Jim. You all out in Zoom land, if for some reason you can't hear us, obviously let us know. And I don't know what we'll do, but we'll do something. Thanks for hanging in there with us this whole day. Again, my name is Richard Heflin. I'm a mental health consultant here at Region 10, working on my 8th year here at Region 10. Previous to that, for about 30 years, my wife and I both taught out in El Paso. So that's kind of where I kind of grew up as a counselor, special education counselor. And I grew up as an educator, as a husband, probably most importantly as a father. And that's one of the biggest things that brings me here today is I guess I want to say survivor of 2 teenagers. Many years ago, thank goodness. My daughter's now 30, my son-in-law is 29, my son is 28. And my wife and I have both always been passionate about parenting. Luckily, our 2 kids were pretty easy to parent. As they have gotten older, we realized how wise they were and how sneaky they were. When they play Remember When, Matt, or Remember When, Beth, we would sneak out, and we had no idea at the time. Looking back, I'm grateful at that, because that prevented a lot of worries on our part, but it is tough raising kids. More so now, especially with the electronic stuff, the technology stuff that we have going on. That was just coming on when my 2 kids were teenagers. So we did get to wrestle with that a little bit. And my wife and I were both very plugged into being parents. She was a middle school teacher, and me being a counselor. We understood completely how important it was for both of us to be very engaged in that process. And my heart has always gone out for those folks who don't have that partnership. So that's kind of what brings me here today, is just what happens when we are kind of at the end of ourselves, and how we can keep from feeling that way as intensely and as often. Still going to have times where we feel emotionally, physically spent, but maybe having the intensity of those feelings not be as strong, and the duration of that time not be as long, and the frequency of those times not be as frequent. That's kind of what we're talking about today. I know you all are at the end of a busy day today, and one challenge that I as a presenter have, being the last presenter, is heavy eyelids. So one thing that's going to help prevent that is, if while we're talking about this information, if something sparks a memory or sparks a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or just interrupt and say, hey, Richard, how about this? What about this? That lets me know you're taking the information, you're applying it to yourself, your specific situation. And that kind of encourages me. And that also lets me know that you're awake too. So let's kind of dive into this. There are some handouts of the presentation, and then a short little handout on just a self-care plan, or the beginning of a self-care plan. And you can find that using this QR code or that URL. That URL will stay up there for a couple of slides. You all probably have heard this already, just what a Region 10 is about. But we really partner with the schools in supporting the schools, in helping the students, your kids, learn in that school, in that educational environment. One thing I like about our attitude and our mission here at Region 10 is that we like partnering with outside folks too. And that's what I like about Jim and his partner networks that he's involved in. It's just a hand-in-hand situation when we partner with them. So let's dive into what stress is all about, and just kind of looking at what stress is, or some ways to think about stress and taking care of ourselves in that stressful situation. This is more of a kind of a thought, a cognitive view of what stress is, and that the thoughts of the stressful event, whatever that event might be, drives some feelings. And it's out of those feelings that push some behaviors. And if we can understand this, we can have the most impact at this thought level. So really looking at our thoughts. Like my son or daughter should do what I ask them to do the first time. And I see your head's like, no. That type of thought, though, is a very rigid, they should do what I ask them to do the first time. If we think things like that, the feeling that's going to be produced very quickly is going to be one of more of an intense type of feeling, more of an intense type of frustration, or maybe even anger. And based on that intensity of that frustration or that anger, it's going to drive some behaviors. And it's this cycle that is repeated again and again that's going to make us feel more stressed out at the end of the day. So if we can kind of use that concept a little bit, and there are a lot of things online, if we want to look at the thought feeling chain of parenting, you'll find a lot more information. But I don't want to dive into that anymore, or we're going to kind of take us away from that self-care idea that we've got going on today. And this is kind of maybe another quick look at that. A stressful situation happens. Some automatic thoughts, again, those shoulds, oughts, musts. I like to tell people, don't should on me and I won't should on you. So those shoulds are going to get us into trouble almost every time. That's going to, again, produce those negative moods or emotions. Some negative behaviors are going to come out of that, and that's going to increase the likelihood of those negative physical symptoms, or that feeling in the gut, the headaches, all those type of things are just going to be increased. As opposed to maybe, is there any way we can move that?
Yes, but okay. I also, thank you for stopping.
Yes.
Because I'm getting people in the chat saying that the Bitly is prompting them to request access.
Oh no, I will fix that as soon as I get finished talking. Because I'm special ed, I've got a PE background, I can't do something and talk at the same time. So as soon as we get finished, I'll get that ironed out. Thank you, Katrina. Yeah, so maybe copy that Bitly down, and within 10 minutes after we end up today, that Bitly will be nice and open for you. I thought I had that fixed. I checked it, and I thought it was fixed. Evidently, it's not. So a more positive look at that stress cycle. So the same stressful event happens. We have this understanding that, kids are not going to do the task I asked them to do the first time. Mm-hmm. That idea is a little bit, maybe looking back at your own history as a child. Did we do the things that our parents asked us to do the first time? Usually not. Even when I'm looking at, I'm not going to bring my wife into that conversation, but so just having that idea of, it's okay if I have to tell my son twice to pick up his dirty clothes or whatever. If we have that type of thought, our behavioral response is going to be a little bit less intense, a little bit more rational maybe. And that's going to push these, just a decrease in our physical symptoms. Our frustration is going to be lower. That understanding of I'm okay as a parent, letting ourselves off the hook, that's going to improve our moods. And all of this thing is going to be a lot more positive. So that's kind of a behavior, a rational behavior kind of look at the stress cycle. Oops, and for some reason, my clicker just stopped working. Let me pull this over here. Use this. Oh no, there we go. Okay. So just some vocabulary and looking at self-care, stress, some other language that may play into this conversation. Compassion, satisfaction is an idea out there. Just how satisfied are we in being a parent? Some of these terms also apply to us in the work setting too. Compassion fatigue, so how tired do we feel?
That's all the people in the world.
Yeah, yeah. Burnout, and some of these kind of overlap, but there are some nuanced differences to all of these. Burnout, we hear a lot of that applied to work. And sometimes that has to do with just this feeling of being overwhelmed and not having the tools that we feel like we need, either being a parent or being an employee at work. And then work-related traumatic stress. This is something that's gained a lot of popularity and a lot of, they've done a lot of research into that area. And just the idea that we can, as individual people, can feel more stress, it can activate a stress response in us, just being around other people in stressful environments. Maybe even parenting our kids. And we see this a lot post-COVID with the nurses and the doctors that were in the hospitals. They're feeling a lot of stress, and they kind of, that stress is, we can kind of think of it as being contagious. It's a little bit different than that, but the thought is kind of still there. And as a counselor working with the group of kids that I worked with, I really felt this over the years, even though I had a really good self-care plan. So just be aware of that. That can sneak into this conversation and the idea of taking care of ourselves and how we do that a little bit more effectively, efficiently. So let's look at stress. Let's dive into stress a little bit. We need to realize that at some point, some parts of stress can be positive. Stress gets us up in the morning and gets us moving. You know, I am a relatively nice guy most of the time. But I don't know if I would come to work every single day if they didn't pay me. You know, maybe once in a while. So I come to work because I'm a nice guy, but also there's some motivation. I need to pay my bills. So that stress is pushing me towards work every morning. That alarm clock goes off at 5:15. I push the snooze button almost every morning, and then eventually I get up. And there's some stress that pushes me out of bed. That's positive. I can manage that. All the resources I have available to me within myself is more than enough to handle that level of stress. I realize that there's going to be a lot of good things happening in my day that day. I realize I'm going to get paid for doing that. So that money will help me get on with life a little bit better. So that positive stress is good. If we look at that positive stress kind of in light of as a student, a positive stress of a test coming up is going to motivate us and push us towards studying for that test. And knowing about that test is a stressful situation. It's going to prompt some study, hopefully some study type of behaviors. And then if stress gets a little bit more intense, it becomes it goes from that positive stress to maybe a more tolerable stress. So if I get up in the morning, alarm goes off, and snooze button goes off, and I'm ready to get up, I've put my legs over the side of the bed, and all of a sudden I realize the dog has been sick over the night. And I realize he's been sick because my foot just landed in some of his sickness. And that's a little bit more stress, but I know what I need to do. I've got some coping skills on board. I've got some really good supportive relationships that I can draw from if I need to. So I get up and manage that. And that makes me a little bit late getting out of the house. So in my lateness, I'm not looking at email because we're not supposed to do that while we're driving. I'm not paying as much attention while I'm driving, and all of a sudden I see these pretty lights in my rearview mirror. And I realized that I hadn't been paying as much attention as I usually do when I drive. And I was speeding, so I get stopped for speeding. But I still know what to do when I get stopped. You know, I pull over to a safe place, turn off the engine, take out the keys, put them on the up here, put my hands into it, so I'm ready for that police officer to come and ask me, and I do all that stuff. I have that understanding. I can still manage that level of stress pretty much okay. And I realize I'm going to be late, but because I've got some supportive relationships at work, my boss is going to be understanding of that type of behavior, I can manage that. And then what toxic stress is more of a prolonged activation of that stress response. And look at this. This is really important. It's in the absence of protective relationships. And it's these protective relationships that act as a buffering agent to stressful situations. We are, and I am naturally a very introverted type of person, strong introverted type of person. You will kind of freak me out a little bit. One at a time, I can manage that okay. But even as that strong introverted person, I realize I need relationships. COVID taught me more about just how much I need relationships more than any other event that happened in my life. So even as a strong introverted person, we need connections. And it's those connections that are going to be buffering agents to stressful situations. And I'm going to repeat that a lot during our talk the rest of the afternoon, just how important relationships are. And if we don't have these protective relationships, positive and tolerable stress can leak down into toxic stress very easily. And if we find ourselves being overwhelmed and not being able to manage, one thing that we can quickly look at is our relationships. How do we feel? How connected do we feel to our community? Whatever that community may be. Maybe it's your work community, maybe it's your faith community, maybe it's your neighborhood community. And hopefully we have several of those. And then we're going to kind of juxtapose a little bit, kind of compare stress to trauma. And trauma is an overused word in our culture these days. And I get that. And sometimes even some professionals use toxic stress interchangeably with trauma sometimes. But I like this definition of trauma the best. It comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency of the government. They're kind of really pushing this definition, and it just makes sense to me. And they talk about the 3 events of trauma. So the trauma starts with an event, and that event can be almost anything. It can be something as serious as abuse or neglect, family violence or any type of violence, or it can be a natural disaster type of event. But what we need to realize is not that event that causes the trauma. What do most people do, most sane people do, if they see some tornadoes moving towards them?
Go into the shelter.
Yeah, they go get some shelter. I'm from Oklahoma.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, oh, geez. And we would go get a glass of iced tea, not sweetened, iced tea, and go sit on the front porch and just watch those tornadoes, watch that storm system. I remember doing that time and time again with my parents. until they got hit by an F5. So, and now they're not so much doing that anymore. But if it were that event, can a tornado cause trauma? Absolutely. Does it have to cause trauma? No. Because if it were me, even in the middle of that tornado, if I were to come up from that storm cellar my wife dragged me down to, and I saw this devastation, it would be how I experienced that event that may lead us to trauma. Another example that I give besides weather is if I explain to you that yesterday, and this didn't happen, because I don't want to trigger some of you all, but if I said that yesterday they had an event here in this room where they had a reptile exhibition. So they had these terrariums all over the place with these wonderful reptiles in them. And they found almost all the snakes. How many of you could get close to being traumatized by that? See, and that excites me again. I would be looking for those poor lost snakes, even if they were venomous. Because snakes excite me. I like snakes. But I still understand how that event can be a traumatic experience for some people. I get that. If it were the event that caused the trauma, it would cause a trauma in everybody. But it's not the event, it's how we perceive that event to be. I love snakes. I've been to rattlesnake rodeos before, those type of events. I seek those type of things out as opposed to being traumatized by them. So again, it's not the event, it's how we experience that event, how we encode that event, how we perceive that event. And then there's going to be some effect that's going to determine whether or not it's a traumatizing event or not. There's going to be a neurological change in our bodies. So our brain is going to do something different than it didn't before, which causes some emotional and even behavioral effects based on that traumatic experience. That onset of that effect may be immediate or it may be delayed, even several years after that event. Our ability to cope is going to be diminished a little bit, maybe significantly. It's going to can very well affect some of our relationships. It's going to affect some of our cognitive skills. And can even affect our physical bodies. There's a huge study that has been out for 20 years now called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study that really takes a deep dive into this. And it was a really profound study and found some just amazing effects that trauma has. Here's some more reactions that trauma can have for folks. I'm not going to go over these really quickly, just kind of look at those. These far right ones are the ones I'm kind of a little bit more concerned about, especially anxiety and depression. Realize that in our students, in our kiddos, it can cause some irritability. Okay, just that irritability, and sometimes we see that with our students, with our kiddos. Here's some sources of trauma. So I'll just kind of let you take a look at those also. There are inventories on the internet that we can take a list like this and see how just stressed out life is kind of encouraging us to be. Some of them are computer scored, so we can take them on the internet and it spits out a score that you're really stressed out, get some help, or hey, life is pretty good. And several different formats of those, but there's some causes of external stress. And here's one thing that we need to kind of spend some time on just really early on, some risk factors. So as we're going through and looking at taking care of ourselves, obviously we want to do what we can to diminish the sources of stress and diminish to the extent we can the risk factors that we have. And looking over these last two lists, this list and these risk factors, some of them we have some control over, and some of them we don't. But what we want to do is, to the extent we can, limit the number of stressful situations and risk factors that we have in our lives and increase the protective factors. So here's a really good list, certainly not an exhaustive list. I'll let you look over that. In the study that I mentioned earlier, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, huge study, 17,000 people in it, 20 years ago. So they had some time to disaggregate all the information from that. One of the things they found was the strongest protective factor that a person can have is this very last one, feeling close at least to one other adult. So again, going back to that relationship, we need to have people that we talk to about our stuff. And probably not just a person, but people, okay, that we talk to. And not just us, but guess what? Our kids also, they need people to talk to about their stuff. And that's been one big difference between the generation that's being raised now and our generation, or certainly my generation. Is even 10 years ago, if we look at our society in general, even 10 years ago, let alone 30 or 40 years ago, 10 years ago, being raised in that environment, we had a lot more people that we could talk to. And I remember when the internet was still just getting going, and they had a list of people that had done bad things to people, those lists. And I heard that they had those lists out, so I got on the internet and looked at those lists and found out that there were two people, one guy that was living just 3 doors down from me that had done bad things to kids. Another guy, the other direction, lived about 1.5 blocks away. Again, he was on a list that had done bad things to the kids. So do you think I let my kids play out front? Absolutely. Do you think I let them roam the neighborhood? And yet when I was growing up, we were always outside. We knew who our neighbors were. We would interact with our neighbors. And occasionally some of those neighbors were some of the people that we felt close to. So our society has changed. And this is one change that I feel like that has come about just within the last 10 years or so. That's had a real negative effect on our sense of being stressed out and how that stress kind of affects us. Again, you have access to this list. Again, what we want to do is increase that the protective factors that we have both for ourselves and for our kiddos. And I like this quote, developing a self-care plan is not just a one and done type of thing. It's going to take some work on our part. Hopefully the work is not going to be a real trudgery type of work. Hopefully there's going to be some positive outcomes to that, and we're going to feel that some of those positive outcomes pretty quickly. And as we're going through this next part, we need to realize that we don't have to do all of these things tomorrow or today. What I encourage people to do is after we look at these next 5 or 6 things, pick one out that seems to be maybe the easiest for you to change or to manipulate a little bit. Maybe that thing that you feel like you'll be successful at the quickest. Or maybe that area in your life that you have the highest need. That would be a good place to start. But just pick one area and start with that area, work on that area for 3 or 4 weeks, and then maybe start including some of these other areas also. We've all heard this, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to put on that oxygen mask on yourself first. We've heard that time and time again since COVID has started, but it is true and it's accurate. And what are some reasons that it's hard in our society to put our masks on first.
We feel like we should help others first.
Right. We feel like we should, and then we're shouldn't on ourselves, right? We feel like we should help others first. Or what does that mean about us if we don't? Or what?
We're not good people. We're not as important as everybody else.
Yeah, we're not as important. Or maybe that we're selfish. If we take care of ourselves first, sometimes, not always maybe, but at least sometimes, we're a little bit selfish. So our society does not support, I think we're getting better, but our society does not really support putting on our mask first. Okay? Does not really support taking care of ourselves first. And it's really important. My sister-in-law is German. She was born and raised in Germany. And we've talked to her often about this idea. And in Germany, and this is a really cool concept that I love, they get paid vacations. They are told they have to leave their house and go on vacation for at least 2 weeks every year, sometimes more often than that. They are encouraged to take care of themselves. So other communities, other societies, other cultures do a little bit better job of this idea than we do. We kind of label people who do a good job at this as being selfish or lazy or some other negative things. Here's just a quick snapshot of that self-care plan that you'll find when I fix it in that folder there. And I just kind of wanted to reference it here just to kind of show you what it's going to look like. Pretty simple, not complicated at all. We're going to break these things down very slowly, starting with, in no particular order, with that physical health. So how do we improve physical health? We're going to take a look at sleep. The Center for Disease Control, so the CDC, they define sleep deprivation as 2 or more nights in a row where we get less than 6.5 hours of sleep. Yeah, I see some of you roll your 6.5. You know, Richard, you know when the last time I got 6.5 hours of sleep? I get it, especially if you have little ones. But the importance of sleep cannot be overstated. It's during that restful time where our brain just resynthesizes all those neurochemicals that we need to function and to feel good. Those positive chemicals that we need to feel good. You know, feeling good isn't just something that's floating around that attaches to us if we're in the right place at the right time. Feeling good is there's a neurological component to feeling good. And if we don't have that neurological stuff going on inside, it's going to be harder to feel good. It's during that sleep time where our body resynthesizes those chemicals to help encourage us feel good. We also need some fuel, obviously. Our diet, we need to kind of look at that. Obviously, you can tell I like my pizza and hamburgers. So I'm not saying stay away from pizza and hamburgers here. I'm saying we need to make sure that we're eating the green leafy stuff. I am not a dietitian, but it's kind of the idea of the stuff we put into a system is going to determine what comes out of that system, and especially if that system is our body. So just be aware of that. When I was developing this and thinking through that, I looked up some diets. And the Mediterranean diet, we've all heard about that. It comes in on the top of the list. It's interesting, on a lot of the diets, including the Mediterranean diet, it said no more than 1 glass of wine a night. It's always kind of interesting. I'm still looking for that diet that says no more than 1 beer a night. So I haven't found it yet. So again, a lot of this information, we can find some other information on the internet. Moving and exercising is really important. It's while our body moves, it helps distribute all those neurochemicals. So we really need to Make sure we're moving enough during the day. My favorite, I've got a physical education background, believe it or not. My favorite form of moving, when I look at the research and stuff, is simply walking. And if we, once in a while, if we invite our kids to go walking with us, that's going to be good for their bodies. I understand the need to get away from the kids sometimes, so maybe that's a good time to leave them at home with somebody else and do that walking in solitude. And then looking at our general health, going to the doctor once a year and doing all that stuff is going to be really, really important part of just our overall general sense of health. And this is something I'm a big proponent of also. It's fun. Every day, doing something that brings joy into our lives. Whether it's something as simple as getting on a joke of the day list and having an email sent to you once a day with a joke on it, it can be something that simple. But increasing our joy in our lives, sharing that joy is going to be important also. Having fun. We just need to have fun in our lives. Sometimes some of us, especially if we've got difficult situations in our home, sometimes we need to schedule in that fun. It doesn't mean that we're being selfish. It means we're being a human being because our bodies are designed to need fun and joy. Positive chemicals are being released during those times. Emotionally, just some things to look at and think about. Progressive muscle relaxation, the PMR up at the top, really good tool to use, especially if you're got some anxieties going on, or you have a child with some anxieties. Progressive muscle relaxation is just a tool, a technique to manage with anxieties and calm yourself and relax your body. A good time to practice that is right before we go to sleep. There are literally hundreds of progressive muscle relaxation scripts on the internet. If you're going to share them with your kids, or if you're going to listen to them right before you go to bed, make sure you listen to them before you go to bed or before you share them with your kids, because some of them are weird. Some of them are really weird. Some of them have visualizations with them. I prefer the ones without. I use them right before, and I would even when I was had a roster of kids that I saw, I would have them download a progressive muscle relaxation on their phone, put their headphones in right as they're going to sleep, do 20 or 30 minutes of that progressive muscle relaxation, and usually they're asleep by the end of that script. Another good time to use that progressive muscle relaxation for some of our students, some of our kids, is right before a test. It helps diminish the effects of test anxiety. Anxiety kind of takes up some space in the brain. It's kind of a weird way to look at it. It takes up some space in the brain. So if we can practice progressive muscle relaxation, we can get it down to doing it before a test in maybe 10 or 15 seconds and bring that anxiety that may be high because of that test down to a more manageable level. Visualizations are out there. They're really good. We've heard a lot about mindfulness and breathing. A lot of good techniques out there on the internet. We need to take a look at our relationships. Are there some relationships out there that maybe just for a season, just for a period of time, that we need to back away from a little bit? Maybe some things in our lives that we need to say no to. Some of us are really good at saying no. That's one thing I've really had to develop in my life is just being able to say no in a nice way. And then, and then mentoring is a really important concept, both professionally and personally. Get someone that, again, a person that you have. Professionally, maybe someone who's been in the profession a couple of years longer, and then somebody in that same profession maybe a couple of years younger, or hadn't been in the profession as long as you have. Just to increase that connectedness to your personal and professional communities. Gratitude, just expressing gratitude. There's a lot of data out there on the importance and the value of expressing gratitude. Family and friends, and then professionally also. And again, there's laughing and fun, watching some good TV shows. There's a lot of fun podcasts, a lot of laughing type of podcasts out there. Looking at the cognitive part of who we are, and this is one thing, this is probably my strongest area because I like to learn. And I like to learn things that I don't know anything about. And really weird things. I mean, if you saw some of the podcasts that I look at, or the YouTubes, they're really bizarre. So just be open to new ideas. There's some place up here eventually that talks about being curious, and being curious really helps us manage stress quite a bit. And as we're going through and developing this self-care plan, think about ways that we can increase these different areas of our lives. I like this idea of the bucket list. And I didn't develop a bucket list until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But things I want to do maybe within 5 years or maybe within the next year. And it keeps us motivated to doing things in a positive direction. Staying curious, there we go. Socially, this is probably one of my weaker areas. So I'll go through it real quick. No. Just having that support network. Healthy boundaries, again, is really important. And take a look at those if we need to tweak those boundaries some, respecting other people's boundaries. As we're going through this self-care plan, if you feel like you need some help, don't be shy about either grabbing a friend and you and your friend doing this together, or if you need to, maybe this would be a good way to start seeing a therapist, going to somebody and sitting down with them, allowing them to help you through this. Some social support. Anybody familiar with NAMI? Okay, NAMI does the National Alliance on Mentally Ill. They've been around a long time, and their name kind of shows it. Their name is kind of outdated a little bit. But we have a very strong NAMI support group in the North Dallas area. There's several around Dallas and Collin County, and even some of our counties way up north. And these type of support groups are just really good at feeding that social connectedness that we need. And then, of course, Partners Resource Network, PRN, just another really good resource to increase this social part of who we are. Financial, I'm not going to talk very much about financialness at all, other than to say it's on the list of areas that we can look at to increase that self-care. Just because a lot of us have some anxieties on that financial parts of who we are. There's a lot of really good apps, especially on budgeting and watching the spending. Really good apps on there to help us out. Okay, so here's what that, just kind of winding things up, what that self-care plan looks like. We've gone through this pretty quickly. I realize that. Any questions about any of the stuff that we've talked about so far? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
This is kind of silly, but what is the updated version of how you would say NAMI? I mean, instead of mental illness, what would you?
That mentally ill is kind of outdated.
And so what's the replacement?
If you would change it, what would you change it to?
National Alliance for Folks.
Great.
That
For
makes
people.
sense.
Post-COVID.
Yeah.
No, for anyone, anytime, anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know.
Mental health?
Yeah. That would probably be
Instead
that.
of illness, say health.
Yeah, I think so.
Mental care, mental, social, emotional.
Mental wellness. Yeah.
Mental
I was
awareness.
just interested.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Crazy.
How did you get better at saying
Okay, that's about a 20-minute question. and this is something I tell in a lot of my workshops. I had a just a mental health crisis professionally and personally. And I realized part of it was because my self-care plan was not up to date. Some of the things that were on my self-care plan, especially the spiritual part of who I am, wasn't up to date. My church was on that positive thing that was on my self-care plan until all of a sudden it wasn't. We had a church split, blah, blah, blah. Just a lot of yuckies. And that church became a huge stressful event in my life. At the same time, my daughter graduated from high school. So I had all these questions about, were you a good father? Is she ready to go out into the world and be a freshman in college? Which is no. And all of that stuff kind of came to a head. And I had this epiphany where I wasn't in a good spot. And I realized one thing I needed to do is start saying no. I said no to some of my relationships, and that was really hard for me to do. And it took just my wife and I, and this is what the way I did it, is I sat down with my wife, so somebody else you're close to, and I just rehearsed what saying no is going to sound like for me. So when I approach these relationships, what's that going to sound like? When someone asks me to do something that I feel like I didn't have time to do, what's that going to sound like? So I had these little tapes that I could play. So instead of saying yes to everything because I didn't know what else to say, and that's what my default is, now I had some things, these tapes that I could say, and how to say no very nicely. So that's kind of what helped me. I was forced into it to begin with. Luckily, I was forced into it. And then I just had to practice. So it just takes practice.
Well, I think women have a particularly hard time saying no because we're supposed to be able to go to work and fix that world and then go home and have dinner on by 5:30.
Right, and you all do a wonderful job at that, except
No.
Except who do you not take care of? So.
I think I learned when somebody said no to me and I was like,
Yeah, what? What do you mean? I don't know what that word is.
was he just do that?
Yeah.
That's how I learned.
Yeah, and that's important. And it's not a selfish thing. It's just a thing just a boundaries issue. I don't have emotional energy right now, or maybe even time to give you what you're asking for and to do all this other stuff that's on my plate and do it in a well manner.
I'm telling my child that.
Yeah.
Oh, I can do
I
that.
can't hear you sing again, please.
Yeah, isn't that tough?
My ears are tired.
Yeah, right. And just maybe drawing some of those boundaries. I remember when, and this is pushed by my wife more than myself, but she said that our kids are just going to have one activity at a time. Mm-hmm. They can have soccer or they can have but they can do one at a time. We're not going to overschedule ourselves. And then we did a lot of family stuff that was really fun that kind of took the place of all those other activities. So that's just kind of how we managed that. Yes, sir.
And part of that same philosophy is that we're doing the activities we're doing, and they wanted to quit an activity because they weren't overscheduled. Is okay, what are you going to replace that with, because you're not going to spend more time on YouTube or whatever,
Yeah.
because you have to have some kind of connections with other people that are stretching you too. So I think there's a balance of not doing enough or self-isolating too.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're going to have a session November. It's on our calendar of events. You all are more than welcome to come, about technology addiction. So if that's something you're interested in, I really am. Look on our.
Take it online.
No. That's good. But it's going to be here, and we'll have breakfast for whoever comes. So that usually is a big draw. Go to region10.org. Look on our workshops button, and then search for mental health, and you'll find it underneath there. If you search for technology, it may not be there, yeah. Or give me a call. My contact information is Richard Heflin. I don't think I have it on this next slide. See if I was smart enough to put it there. Nope. It's richard.heflin@region10.org.
It's not Richard.
Okay, yeah. .org. Give me an email. That's the best way to contact me. Yeah, then we can go from there. Okay, if you can't find it on the calendar events, or if a question pops into your head on the way home, again, you give me an email. If you want to talk, email me. Hey, can we have a conversation? And we can certainly do that too. Any other questions or comments? Thank you all again for coming. Really appreciate your time, the sacrifice that you did, and just being here for your child. There's going to be a payoff. Things will eventually get better. Okay. You all have a good afternoon, a good evening, and a safe trip home.
Thank you.